Hey guys, sorry about the lack of content and videos from me lately. I've just been crazy busy with my job right now. Thanksgiving weekend, and I'm sure close to Christmas weekend, that'll be just absolutely nuts for me. So I apologize for the lack of content. I apologize. I'm probably like the last person on YouTube to probably review this movie, and that's Ghostbusters Afterlife. And for those who are wondering, if I do end up reviewing House of Gucci, I apologize if that film is going to be a late review for me as well. And like I said, I don't even know at this point if I'm going to get around to seeing that or not with my busy schedule and things like that. But once again, I apologize for that for like the 5 millionth time. So hopefully, at some point in the future, when Christmas is done and New Year's is done and all that stuff, I'll be able to kind of get back on track and do more timely videos and things like that. So, but anyway, this review is for Ghostbusters Afterlife. This film is the third and somewhat a reboot of the franchise for Ghostbusters. It does take place after the events of the first two films. Some sources online say this is just a direct sequel to the first film, but there is a couple of things here that might suggest that Ghostbusters 2 still exists in this universe. But whether or not the first Ghostbusters film did happen in this universe, whether the second film did or not, I'm not really 100% sure on. But if I were to guess, my guess is that yes, it did happen as well, the second film. Just the events of the first film are more significant than the ones in the second one for this movie. But anyway, for this movie, basically Egon's daughter and grandchildren, they basically get his farmland home that he's been living on since the events of Ghostbusters 2, if that film still happened. And near the end of his life, he's had a ghost that he had to deal with. And it's kind of some unfinished business in a sense. So by the time that his daughter and grandkids move in, there's still something to the house that's still paranormal and still kind of haunts it and still has this evil entity that lurks around the home and things like that. And throughout the course of this film, the grandchildren try to fit in school. The oldest son tries to land a job at this burger joint in the town that they live in. It's really is kind of this small rundown town called Somerville, I think it's called. And the daughter is struggling to make money and doesn't really have a job. And really, Egon's house is really kind of the last thing she has to kind of live in without getting evicted from it and not having to worry about money and things like that. And so throughout the course of this film, both of the grandchildren that are Egon's grandchildren, one of them is played by McKenna Grace, the other is played by Finn Wolfhard from Stranger Things. They really feel like there's something wrong with the town, that there really is something that is still around that Egon had unfinished business with, like we learned about early on in the movie. And so throughout the course of this film, there's certain characters that exist from the Ghostbusters universe that return for this movie. And some of them are stronger and have a much more vengeful look at life now since the events of the first film. And it's up to Egon's grandchildren, along with some of the friends that they make in this town, to kind of stop this evil entity once and for all that Egon himself tried to stop before his death. But overall, I really enjoyed Ghostbusters Afterlife a lot, you guys. This is a film that has just been thrown around a lot. I know they tried to do a reboot of Ghostbusters back in 2016 with an all-female Ghostbusters team. I personally was not a big fan of that movie. I think a lot of the people involved with it are very talented people. It was just a very unfortunate misstep of a very bad script given to really talented people, and unfortunately a reboot that really didn't work very well. So I am kind of glad that they are ignoring that movie and kind of sticking with the first film and potentially the second film and kind of continuing off of those two earlier films the way that I'm sure most Ghostbusters fans were hoping they were going to work off of. I also will say right off the bat too, I like this new Ghostbusters team. It is one of those rare things where anytime they delay a sequel this long, people just anticipate the original Ghostbusters team to kind of team up for a big adventure again. And to be honest, I liked these kids enough where I enjoyed what they were doing and I enjoyed this journey that they were going on. And I liked that they were finding out about the Ghostbusters equipment and learning about it themselves and things like that. Even though the original Ghostbusters team is in this movie, and that's really not much of a spoiler because it's very much hinted in the trailer that they will show up at one point in the movie. The original Ghostbusters team does exist in this universe and things like that. But it is one of those movies where I felt invested in these kids and this journey and these paranormal discoveries that they made, that I felt invested as a viewer in going on this journey with them and making sure that they resolved this paranormal case that they encountered. But for my positives and negatives of this movie overall, you guys, probably one of the biggest positives I have for this movie is I like how it's in the same Ghostbusters universe as those first two films, while being about new and great characters too. I really felt invested in Carrie Coon's character kind of finding her financial feet again and finding a job and meeting another guy again. Paul Rudd has a role in this film. He plays the science teacher to McKenna Grace in this film. She's the kind of the young granddaughter of Egon. Um, I felt invested in these characters. They were funny and they were likable, and they had something about them that you wanted to root for and you wanted them to overcome their problems. With Paul Rudd's character, he's kind of this lazy science teacher that still loves science, still loves when a student gets passionate about science, but at the same time, because the students are so lazy in his class and nobody really wants to learn anything, he just kind of finds these old horror film VHS tapes in the school break room for the teachers and just kind of puts them on every day and things like that. Um, so I felt invested in these characters. I enjoyed this journey that they were going on, specifically with Egon's grandchildren, finding the Ghostbusters equipment and learning how to use it and things like that. There's a kid in the school that McKenna Grace becomes friends with named Podcast. Very much kind of the next Dan Aykroyd of the group, kind of, for this new Ghostbusters team. Very funny. Definitely has kind of the voice and the energy of a Dan Aykroyd a little bit. I just really enjoyed his character. He even has kind of the same goggle thing that Dan Aykroyd wore in the first two movies. I just really felt invested in these new characters, and that's really something you really can't say a lot for in most franchises. Sometimes when they try to make it about a new set of characters, you just kind of don't care about them very much. But this film did that. This film made me invested in those new characters, and I like that they exist in the same universe as those first two Ghostbusters films did. And I did like all the nods and references to those first two Ghostbusters films. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, of course, is referenced. There's a character here that isn't Slimer, unfortunately, but it's very much in the spirit of Slimer. There's just so many things that you can point out and probably find if you're a huge Ghostbusters fan throughout the movie. Tons of fun references to be found here. And like I said, Paul Rudd is very funny in this movie. I know he got the sexiest man alive or whatever that People's Choice Award thing was, but he's a good-looking guy. But most importantly, I think the reason why we all love Paul Rudd so much, and why I love Paul Rudd so much, is because he is funny. He just has this screen presence to him that is funny. He knows how to tell a joke. He knows how to time a joke. He knows what to joke about when on screen and things like that. He's a very likable character in this movie. You really kind of hope that him and the mom kind of end up being together and things like that. There's certain things that they kind of pull from earlier Ghostbusters films that also kind of poke fun at that too. So I really enjoyed what Paul Rudd did here. If you're a huge fan of him and you love his humor, I think you're really going to like what Paul Rudd does in this movie. I also liked all of the what did I write here? Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I like all the new and interesting Ghostbusters team members, specifically podcasts. Just a ton of fun and energy to this kid. And I like kind of how McKenna Grace was kind of the new Egon, and Finn Wolfhard was kind of the new Bill Murray comic relief and things like that. So they definitely kind of made it in the spirit of the original Ghostbusters team, and I think that was the smartest choice to do here. I really felt invested in these new characters throughout the runtime. I also like the small town setting of this movie. I like how it's not in New York. It's not in Los Angeles or Miami. It's not some big city that this film takes place in. I like how it is a smaller setting. It is a smaller problem. It is something where this town really hasn't had any issues or has kind of been in a lull for a long time. And I like how there's this big new paranormal problem that exists within it. And I like how people are concerned about it. They want to know what the problem is. They want to know how to resolve it. Specifically, Paul Rudd's character is kind of intrigued by all the earthquakes that are happening in the town and what they could possibly do to stop it and things like that. But I like how it's like a smaller town setting. It gives the film more of a, and this kind of leads into my next positive point too. It gives the film more of a Goonies and Stranger Things kind of a vibe. You can definitely tell they were inspired by those kind of stories. I like how Jason Reitman, who is the son of Ivan Reitman, who did the first two Ghostbusters films, I like how he took this material and really kind of made it its own. Really kind of took from the era that Ghostbusters came from, which was the 80s, took things that are from the 80s or remind us of the 80s in the sense of like Stranger Things and Goonies, and making it its own thing. It doesn't feel like it's stealing or plagiarizing anything. It really does feel like it's being inspired by those stories to kind of tell a new form of Ghostbusters story and to kind of breathe new life into that while breathing new life into things like Goonies and Stranger Things and things like that. So I really liked all the choices and inspiration that the film took because, like I said, the small town setting and the Goonies and Stranger Things inspired moments really kind of add to the movie and really make it something special and new for the Ghostbusters franchise. But for my negatives of Ghostbusters Afterlife, unfortunately, there is a lot of plot conveniences in this movie. Certain things like Finn Wolfhard getting the Ecto-1 to randomly work out of nowhere, and it's running perfectly fine, and the tires don't need to be replaced, and it has tons of gas in it and things like that. It's able to do like big jumps and things like that. Certain things like that make no sense in this movie, unfortunately. The fact too that these kids kind of found these proton packs in Egon's basement and just are kind of masters of using them all of a sudden when they seem like they're really difficult devices to use for someone who's never seen them before and things like that. So there is a lot of things like that in this movie that kind of don't make a ton of sense. There's certain things too, like how did some of the ghosts from the first film make it into this small town all the way from New York City and things like that. There's things like that that unfortunately don't make a ton of sense here, but for the most part, I really enjoyed this movie. There's unfortunately just a lot of plot conveniences like that throughout the movie that keep the film from being, let's say, as good as the first Ghostbusters film. The film also kind of has a somewhat slow pace to it. I don't mind a slow pace in a movie if it has like a lot of character building and it builds things up and develops things in the right way. I feel like it's doing all the things it should be doing, but I think with this film in particular, it does feel a little slow at times. There's just a lot of scenes where it just kind of takes its time maybe a little bit too much. So maybe something with the pacing could have been done, maybe even with the editing that could have made the film stand out a little bit more. I also thought some of the things that, because there was discussion early on in the movie about these earthquakes happening even before Egon had problems with this paranormal stuff in this farmland home. I think that could have been explained some more as to what exactly those other earthquakes could have been, and if they were involved with paranormal cases and with Egon's problem with this ghost on the farm and things like that. So I thought the stuff with the earthquakes could have been explained some more because they just kind of gloss over it at one point and they kind of never come back to it. So it's just another question in the film that never unfortunately really gets answered. I also thought more time could have been spent with the original Ghostbusters. The film kind of has a hard time, specifically in the third act, of is it going to be a glorified cameo of the Ghostbusters team, or is it going to be a continuation of the Ghostbusters team, but it's all done in the third act? There's kind of a struggle between those two choices. When the film reaches its third act, I thought. I really liked the original Ghostbusters team. I liked what this film does to kind of explain what happened to them over the years and things like that, and kind of how the Ghostbusters team dissolved and kind of went their own ways and things like that. I think the film really should have made the choice of, is this a glorified cameo or is this a big continuation of the Ghostbusters original team, but the third act really goes strong with that. There's moments in this movie where I feel like the film kind of struggles with that choice. So I personally would have preferred a story that the original Ghostbusters team had more explanation on, and we found out more of what they were doing over the years and things like that. But I don't know. This film is very divided amongst critics and fans. Some critics thought this film had too much fan service. Some fans thought that this film could have been more of a part 3 more than anything else. But I'm kind of in the middle. I really think this is a really great movie that really kind of accomplishes what it's doing. A couple of problems along the way, like plot conveniences and a slow pace and more time with the original Ghostbusters felt necessary and things like that. But I really enjoyed Ghostbusters Afterlife after all. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. I really enjoyed this film a lot. If you're a huge Ghostbusters fan like I am, I think you're really going to like what this film does. Like I said, a couple of problems along the way. I think the original Ghostbusters is still my favorite of the Ghostbusters films. I would say the first one, then this one, then Ghostbusters 2, and then, of course, I really didn't like the 2016 reboot, so that's kind of my least favorite of the Ghostbusters films. So 8.5 out of 10 for me. Really enjoyed this film a lot. If you're a huge Ghostbusters fan, make sure to see this one. I highly recommend it.